Great. So once again, a very good evening to all of you who are present here today. And today we have a session, an Adda session with Aditya Nigam on hijacked ideologies and the decolonial wrong turn. And prior to that, I would very briefly introduce Aditya. And Aditya is a phenomenal political theorist. He has been a professor at the CSTS in New Delhi. He has participated in vastly various forms of political activism, on theories, on perspectives, especially on the question of decoloniality in India. He has written books, he has written journal articles, he has written multiple blogs, and it's very essential to mention about his Kafila blog, which he has co-curated since 2006. And it's a fantastic place to read very well researched, very well thought, deeply experienced radical ideas and perspectives that is currently extremely relevant in the compromised intellectual, socio-cultural, and political context of India currently. So without delaying further, and of course, thanks Aditya for your consent, for joining in, and it's fascinating to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for inviting me. It's actually a pleasure. Long time since we connected. Last time, I think it was when you were in Johannesburg.
Yes,
So,
yes.
yeah, I've never been on Adda. So, hello, everybody who are regular Adda presence. Good to be here.
Great. And so, Aditya, to start off with my first question, and I'm of course very well aware of the fact that you do not agree with the term decolonial wrong turn, and about which I would like to hear more from you. But to start off with the wider perspective, one of the essential character of the current right-wing fascist socio-political scenario of India is to use this term decoloniality, of course, in vacuum, without scholarly foundations, deliberate misreading of texts and ideas and ideologies, misframing of different sort of texts and contexts. However, what we see is there is a very systemic celebration of these problematic, misrepresented perspective of decoloniality, what is being told as rather decoloniality in the contemporary state of existence. And we can see that through and especially as someone being from the academic space, we can see it very prominently in terms of the conferences being held, in terms of the kind of fellowships being offered, in terms of the research grants. There is a consistent process of imposing this problematically framed decoloniality, decolonial philosophy, decolonial perspectives, widely within the Indian knowledge-making process. And of course, needless to say about the IKS, the Indian knowledge systems.
Oh, yeah.
We realize this at the ground level. There is a deep down problem, yet there is also a celebration of this problematic version of the decoloniality in India. And why do you think there is this dichotomy that is consistently existing within our everyday ways of thinking, acting, and knowledge making?
Thanks a lot. Actually, this is now a topic like last uh, few months I've had to talk about this in three different occasions, three different places, because it is something which is bothering a lot of people. So I understand that, but I think the I'll come to my response to it in a moment. But first, just to lay out what the diagnosis of the whole situation is that, see, if you look at the Indian situation, the search for an indigenous social science has been very old, for practically it was there during the anti-colonial struggle, then it kind of after independence became a little stymied because all new institutions were being built along modern lines. And what does modern mean? You're suddenly independent. You suddenly have to stand in the world. You're whether it's the IIMs or the IITs or the universities, social science universities, you don't have the time to actually, even if you want it. It's a different question whether the post-colonial Indian elite wanted, the Nehruvian elite wanted it. But even if you wanted, at that time, it was historically impossible. Historically, if you had to stand in the world, the available cutting edge knowledge which was available, which was all the syllaba and curriculum were made from what was available, which was mostly of Western provenance. And there wasn't much of an indigenous, quote unquote, indigenous dimension to it. But through the 50s, 60s, we have seen. So, for example, there was this Lucknow School of Sociology, and they were kind of trying to develop something like an indigenous sociology and so on. Now, this debate continues through right up to the 80s and 90s in different forms. I mean, it's not the same debate. But for example, in the 80s, there is a whole, in the center in which I subsequently worked, the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, there was a whole effort to connect up with the movements against big dams. And so a whole critique of mega development, mega science, and the science establishment and all that started developing from there, in which at that early stage, apart from the activists like Medha Patkar and all, Vandana Shiva, J. Bandyopadhyay, or that J. Bajaj, number of them were involved in it. And it was basically an attempt to find and or to make an argument which would look at this aspect also of what development was doing, what development meant to the modernist sectors of Indian society, which was like not more than 10% or maximum 20% of the society, if you stretch it too much, what it was doing to the rest of Indian society. And so that was one of the key impetuses around that time. Now, I personally find, and then what happened was in the 90s that we all know, much of the current anxieties and the current kind of articulation of this whole hijacking thing is a replay of the 1990s. I remember at that time people like Partha Chatterjee and Ashish Nandi and Gautam Bhadra and all were all like labeled as crypto right wing, crypto Hindutva, and so on. But then things changed and the world moved on. We are all on the same side of the barricade, and so all those things kind of changed. But some people, of course, never change, and so, so those things kept coming back. But my point here is that the very idea of an indigenous social science was a cul-de-sac. There cannot be any social science of any based on nations and nationalities and so on. If there is anything called a social science, it has to have some kind of, even if not universal, it has to at least be context transcending. It cannot be that I have an Indian social science and somebody will say I'll have Bengali social science and I'll have a Telugu social science. That's not how it works. So one of the big problems, I think, was that that whole debate right up to the 90s was kind of caught up within a certain nation state framing. And so, and anti-colonial, decolonial meant uh, indigenous. Now, I should also mention that in that period, you will see uh, there were historians like Dharampal, who was not a trained historian but a Gandhian. There were many Gandhians doing their various research at that time. Some of it may be problematic for us. I agree. I grant that. But some of it was quite interesting in terms of. So, if you read, for example, Claude Alvarez's work on technology in the alternative technologies in the Asian region, in India, China, and so on. Much of what he's drawing on, in fact, a large part of what he's drawing on are the documents collected and with annotations by Dharampal, the Gandhian scholar. Ultimately, what happened? Dharampal was attacked as right wing, this, that, etc., etc. And ultimately, now if you search for Dharampal, you'll only find him being used by right wingers. But actually, I think a lot of his work, like Claude Alvarez has used, a lot of his work can be very important. And most of it is actually documentary research based on the archive. So that's the as far as the overall picture is concerned. Now, in this, you'll find Gandhians, you'll find even some ex-Nakshals in, let us say, in this outfit called the People's Patriotic Science and Technology, founded in the mid-80s. So there were some people who had come in from the Naxalite movement. They were also there. And they were basically trying to find, now this is important, it is a big step to break from the binary which had been set up during colonial rule of the materialist West versus the Eastern spiritualist East, which our nationalist elite, including the intelligentsia and the political elite, swallowed hook, line, and sinker. So half the battle was lost there because your self-image, everybody who writes only writes about the great spiritual mission of India. If you look at all the 20th century scholarship, most of it till about the 80s and 90s, will be talking about India's great spiritual mission and so on. What people like Dharampal and some of these people in PPST were doing, even though one or two of them then broke away and went towards the right wing, is that they were trying to say, look, all that was happening in India was not just spirituality and spiritual mumbo jumbo. There was science, technology, all that was developing. So what they were trying to actually show was that in pre-colonial India was not just about religion, spirituality, and so on. Now, what has happened with the English-speaking elite, the colonial, what is it? The offsprings, so to speak, which all of us are part of it, that they actually never understood. They're totally intolerant about anything which sounded even vaguely indigenous. They were so caught up in this whole colonial fascination of the colonial and the Western model of progress, development, etc., that they simply attacked. So I'm saying Dharampal is only one. Partha Chatterjee was attacked. Ash Nandi was attacked. All these were attacked for being right wing or being crypto right wing or crypto Hindutva. So this is not something which actually is something new. When you say that there is a hijacking, it is of course true, but it is also expressive of the fears of a middle class which can only speak English and only think in the way it has learned to think. It has no connection with the large sectors of Indian society. And that is, I think, where the problem lies, which is where you hand over practically everything to the right wing. The problem does not lie in the so-called hijacking. Now, the last part of your thing, I don't want to extend this too much. I will wait for so that the conversation remains. Last part which you said, I think what has happened now, why it has become so prominent and widespread is because they are in power. Frankly, if they had not been in power, all these conferences, all these things, and the kind of place where they're forcing everybody to do it, whether it's Indian knowledge system, whether it's some, every single thing in every university is being forced down the necks or throats of the faculty there. And so everybody has to do it. Research agendas have to be set like that. Now, that is a problem of power. That is not a problem of posing the question of decoloniality or anything.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Aditya, for this very elaborative response. And I think it just sets the conversation in really uh, thought-provoking and multi-dimensional directions. And of course, I of course invite people to, if you already have questions, feel free to put in the chat box or just feel free to raise your hands and we can just go ahead. Meanwhile, I was wondering, I mean, especially when you were talking about this, how in the present times, because they are in political power and they are just pushing it down our throats without allowing us to critically question. Any form of critical questioning, critical interrogations, resistances are, kind of silenced with heavy hands. I was wondering about one thing. I mean, with respect to the question of power, why there is so much of fear. I mean, to come to a bit more specific about what is being fleshed out as decoloniality, and which I sort of understand as the decolonial wrong turn, or pushing decoloniality in problematic wrong directions, or pushing ideologies perspectives as decoloniality in the wrong directions. Why there is so much of fear, and I use the word fear very consciously here, why there is so much of fear to acknowledge the scientificity, the logic, the rationality of knowledge systems. I mean, what I feel is, and I have always felt this personally, that India, with its history, of course, of its own forms of traditional sciences and mathematics and technologies and medicine, has a lot of potential to indulge with the perspective of the so-called Indian knowledge systems, but also through the lens of science, through the lens of rationality, through the lens of logic, through the acknowledgement of the historical diversity, our exchanges across the border, across South Asian region, and across the world, and so on and so forth, rather than not something doing in terms of pseudo-sciences, pseudo-technologies, or ethno-sciences, as scholars are talking about, even in that series, in that blog series of decolonial imaginations, right? But there is a fear. I mean, the resistance shows that there is always a fear within this current right-wing fascist regime to engage with the question of decoloniality through sciences and literature and technologies and whatever in a very logical, rational way. My question is, like, why do you think this fear is so prominent in their ways of looking into the perspectives of decoloniality?
Look, their fear I can understand because they actually have no, I have long argued, I've argued in my book also and subsequently also, that they are not decolonial or anti-colonial or anything. They were neither anti-colonial during the anti-colonial struggle, but even in terms of their very existence, their very being, they're not anti-colonial. Even today, their alliances are with Trump and the Zionist settler colonial state and the white supremacists all over the world. Their alliances are very clear. They are not anti-colonial or decolonial in any sense. But more importantly, if we take it just to the domain of knowledge, what is the most crucial thing here? Uh, every single part or every single aspect of Hindutva politics is predicated on the colonial enterprise. The categories, very categories of Hindu Muslim did not actually exist before the colonialists came and started. Like if you look at the uh, uh, even let us say Cambridge school historians who have been arguing that there was no colonialism did not institute any break. and that it only built on whatever was already existing. And they try to therefore find continuities about everything from colonialism, from communalism to everything in a pre-colonial past. Now, that's a separate argument. It's a very, I don't want to distract the discussion here and detract the discussion into that. But even some of them who had actually who start off arguing that actually Hindu-Muslim categories were in existence before colonialism, their own evidence does not show that. So Cynthia Talbot and this one, sorry, another, I'm forgetting her name. Anyway, for example, they've done this study of the Vijayanagar Empire edicts, right? Now, 14th century edicts, first time you actually start having references to Hindu, but the Hindu is basically a geographical descriptor to demarcate from the foreigner. Now, who are the foreigners referred to? The foreigners, invariably, when they are talking about it, they start talking about them as Muslims. But the edicts are talking about the Parasaics, which is the Persians. They are talking about the Yavanas, which are the Ionians, which is the Greeks. They are talking about the Turks, the Turk. So they are talking about or Afghans. So they are talking about where they are coming from rather than their religion, right? Those edicts don't talk of it. So, but already by the 19th century, from the beginning, the Europeans, British come with the memories of the Christian memories of the Crusades. Let me put it very brutally. They come with the Christian memories of the Crusades and start looking at Muslims and Islam through the lens of the Crusade memories. And so that's when they start talking about Hindus, Muslims, and so on, their whole Muslim thing. In fact, just the other day, I was rereading an older piece by Shudipto on reverse Orientalism of Budhat Mukhopadhyay. And Budhat Mukhopadhyay, is writing in like 1890s. He's a conservative Hindu thinker, very self-consciously Hindu thinker. Even Bhudev is saying, written this essay in the Samajik Prabandhavali, is written sometime in the 1892-93, where he's saying that actually one of the reasons today this big division between the Hindus is because these Hindus and Muslims or for hating the Muslims is because the British have now started teaching us history that the Muslims did untold atrocities on the Hindus during Muslim rule and so on and so forth. And he said, actually, if you look at the Brahmins of that time, they were very well versed in Persian. They would have no problem. They had no problem in working with those regimes. But 1890s, Bhudev Mukhopadhyay has to say this, that it is with the British that the idea is being actually now dinned into our heads, taught to us through British education, that Muslims, so now it's already a homogenized 1000-year rule, which is the basis of BJP's politics or RSS's politics. It is not something they have come down. So this whole homogenized something called 1000-year oppression of Muslims over Hindus. This Bhudev is talking about in the 1890s and saying this is the problem. So this is not something which is suddenly emerging. So what I'm saying is that if you actually start looking at every single strand of RSS politics, all of it, lock, stock, and till the last comma, full stop, is borrowed or based on what knowledge was produced by colonialism. So they can never be comfortable with the kind of thing you're talking about. How can they be comfortable about anything? All that they know is, oh, Ganesh ji ka वो सिर लगा दिया human पे उसका सिर लगा दिया तो plastic surgery. This is idiocy. No, this is not. There is no doubt about the fact that 8th and 9th century, maybe even earlier, but especially the 7th, 8th, 9th century, once the Abbasid Caliphate headquarters shifted to Baghdad, and the Baitul Hikmah was eventually established there, where knowledge from all over the world was collected, debated, translated, archived. At that time, even a delegation of quote unquote Hindu Sanskrit scholars were landed up there at their invitation, and they had developed the basic this thing of the sign function of trigonometry. And what later developed as Arab mathematics and Arab astronomy and so on, a lot of it builds on Brahmagupta Siddhanta and the stuff that these people took there. In another century, the Arabs actually developed from the sine function to the cosine, the cotangent and cotangent, and the cosec and cosec. So all these sec and cosec, all the 6 functions of trigonometry were developed after that. But what that shows is obviously that not only was there a lot of scientific, mathematical work going on here, but that it was also interacting with the world across, mainly through the Arab world. The relationship with the with early Islamic world is not one that British taught us to believe, which has now become the RSS politics, which is found every day on the streets with goons dancing outside masjids on Eid. That's basically simply and uh, crude instantiation of that kind of politics. So I don't see any reason why and how they are in every respect. So even if you talk about science, so just to conclude this point, their idea of Indian tradition is not the science and the technology and the rationalism of Indian tradition. There is also a lot of Charvak and Buddhism, and so they don't accept all that. All that they want in the name of Indian tradition is Vedas and Puranas. Maybe not even the Vedas in that sense, because actually the post-Vedic, the Upanishadic, there are many different directions in which that goes. After all, in Akbar's court, the what was Darashikoh doing? Not just of Akbar's court, but later Darashikoh's Majma al-Bahrain is trying to find commonalities between Islam and Vedantism. Right? That was the initiative which was started in Akbar's court. So it's not that everything that what they want is something very specific. It's Brahminical, it's oppressive, and it belongs to a particular class of oppressors.
Of course, and while you were sharing about I mean, addressing the question of fear specifically, I was just thinking around that. I mean, the kind of vacuum in which they, sort of, celebrate their problematic ideologies, high caste Brahminical ideologies as decoloniality is also when we look at the kind of vision and the mission they have put for the IKS, where they talk about the complete, like quoting, complete decolonization of the Indian mind, which is in itself problematic. I mean, what is the definition of a complete decolonization is the first question, especially when there are certain strands of thinking and actions in our everyday lives which have got diluted, muddled up in so many directions that even if it is difficult to distinguish between what is colonial and what is decolonial and what is post-colonial there. And also the kind of contradictions. Recently, they came up with this open access book. I mean, if somebody is curious to look into what is written there, it's there on the IKS website. It's called the Indian Knowledge Systems, with a very interesting subtitle called A Primer. So, and there they use the term decolonization and decoloniality, each of these terms just once there, but the kind of examples they set as decolonization and decoloniality is absolutely contradictory to what they are doing in practical terms. They highlight it in bold letters where they talk about, where they give an example of the colonial knowledge systems through criticizing the US political ideologies, political knowledge systems. And we know the practical story is absolutely contradictory in nature. Of course, I have more reflections, more perspectives to sort of, because the conversation is really getting into interesting directions. But prior to that, I would like to take up a comment, Aditya, if that's fine. Kumar Shushil writes, Meera Nanda, in her book Postcolonial Theory and the Making of Hindu Nationalism, talks about two strange bedfellows, the postcolonial left and the Hindu right. And if you have some comments on that perspective, Aditya.
I have nothing to say about Mirananda. Really, I think she's lying all through her book. Even where she has cited me, she has lied. She is leading the unsuspecting, trusting reader into believing something. Somebody who has not read the people she's citing, they will read Mirananda and think so and so is saying that. And I think anybody who wants to figure out what the others are saying will have to read the people she's citing, because she is dishonest. And frankly, this is old hat of the 1990s. I'm telling you, I'm really not interested in it. Uh, the These arguments were played out, rehearsed. We fought it out, and not just. I'm telling you, not Mirananda is nothing compared to. I mean, we had very close, dear friends with whom we had to fight it out, and it's only when the NDA government, first the Vajpayee government and now this government, but already by the time of Gujarat, where it was first NDA government, we already, those initial bits of misunderstandings or whatever, because of the heat of the debate at that time, got sorted out because we're all fighting on the same side of the barricade. Mirananda was nowhere anywhere. So suddenly somebody comes and becomes the prophet and tries to, like, I have nothing to say to that. I mean, if somebody like Sumit Sarkar or Tonika Sarkar was saying something, I would respond to it. Yeah, I have an somebody like Achin Vinayak is arguing, I'll respond to it. Why should I respond to Mirananda? I've gone through that book. I've gone through that book, and I find it's a bundle of lies and another bundle of fears of somebody who is actually totally culturally illiterate, has absolutely no sense of the larger Indian society. She's still, her idea of Indian history is, she's still expecting she's in Weimar, Germany, and the next step is going to happen. I mean, that's not how things work.
Thanks, Aditya, for the question. I see Sanjeev Mukherjee has the hand up. Yes, Sanjeev, please go ahead with your question.
Small points. One is what Aditya was saying, that during the national movement, we had this conception of India being spiritual and the West materialist. But I think this is not entirely true, because in the early 20th century, Calcutta University had a lot of, they started their publication. Calcutta University was set up in early 20th century. And you have books. The first publications of Calcutta University Press was Prafulla Chandra Roy's History of Hindu Chemistry, History of Hindu Mathematics, and various such books. So they were trying to find an Indian, materialist tradition, scientific tradition, technological tradition. The second thing that I want, I think we have to look at BJP's decolonial project as part of their the BJP, the entire leadership and its social base does not belong to the English speaking elite. They belong to vernacular classes, middle class, lower middle class, and other backward castes as well. So they are fighting in India today. They are fighting against the colonial elite, the English-speaking elite, as Aditya was saying. And this elite was so entrenched and so entitled that this was a kind of a popular revolt against this colonial elite, Latians, Delhi, as they call it. And it was a project to appropriate the nation, redefine the nation in Hindu terms, which also had a strategic, this as a result, this decolonialism was also strategic in the sense that this would enable them to gather an electoral majority for all times to come. And in the wake of the crisis of representation and consent, which the Congress faced right from the mid 1960s, Indira Gandhi re-established Congress rule, but it was a very short-lived popular support that she got. After that, no party has been able to get a majority, except in very unusual circumstances, like when Indira Gandhi was assassinated. And so BJP is trying to build a new support base by reappropriating the nation, and these are strategic, instruments to legitimize them, legitimize their project, and it's a kind of a populist, anti-colonialism, anti-English-speaking elite, anti-Latians, Delhi, etc. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sanjeev. Actually, that's very important point that you brought in. What happens usually is that when one tries to like sum up in like a very short, crisp few sentences a whole century or two-thirds of a century of anti-colonial struggle, that you focus only on the main themes. Now, I would say the kind of things you're referring to were definitely happening, but they were happening in a way in which, the way Gyan Prakash talks in Another Reason, he discusses, in fact, all of this and how there was an investment during the anti-colonial struggle of a certain kind of Hindu nationalism to reclaim science as part of Indian tradition. And that they were doing to some extent, but that was, in any case, it was being driven in a kind of Hindu direction. And therefore, Hindu chemistry and this, that, and so on and so forth. So even though they're talking about science and materialism and so materialist dimensions, the direction in which it was going, and I was quite persuaded by Gyan Prakash's argument with it long back. So that's one. But the second thing which you're saying is also, it's something which most people don't, I think, understand, that the element of popular revolt within this. So now this is something not unprecedented. In fascism also you find a kind of the mass following the fascists was culturally anti-bourgeois. So even if you say that fascism was working for finance capital, this, that, and so on, how do they manage to actually get this mass with them is the question. How does a arch billionaire like Donald Trump, not billionaire, but like the leader of billionaires, manage to get the support of the dispossessed white working class, white provincial working class in the US? There is something he shares with them, for which it is easy to target the progressives and the radicals and so on, because the progressives and radicals are talking about uh, immigrants, they're talking about multiculturalism, they're talking about respecting the other, and so on and so forth. And this is a much more raw, aggressive, and even, of course, misogynist and so on kind of discourse, which the male working class, male provincial working class, which has lost out during globalization, finds it very easy to relate to Trump and his language, Trump or these rowdies like Pete Hegseth. So this more or less a similar kind of logic is at work here also. I believe that much of this, whether they need decoloniality for that, I think they need decoloniality more for getting an intellectual legitimacy and so on. But for the public, it's basically, yes, it's the English-speaking elite, it's the Lutyens, Delhi, Khan Market gang, and so on, which is what gives them the kind of uh, and this whole thing about educated and uneducated. So now the fact of the matter is that unfortunately, when we start attacking them for being uneducated, that might often backfire, because what they're actually getting their support on is the fact that they're not they've not got the opportunities that others had. So those are the kind of things where what Sanjeev you're saying, I think I entirely agree with you on that. I mean, it's completely directed at that kind of elite, which was entitled and which had control over all the institutions uh, for decades.
Great. Thanks, Aditya, for your response. I now see Saba. So after Saba, I will go to Asim in the chat box. So yeah, Saba, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for holding this conversation, Dr. Day and Aditya. A lot of things are coming up for me. And like the first and the foremost is that I was this whole idea of decolonization that is there, and that the government that we are, in this phase of that the government is saying that the Indian mind should be decolonized. But then I'm thinking about this whole idea of when the Macaulay's minutes on India's education system, and where he explicitly mentioned that the Arabic and the Sanskrit has got the knowledge system in these languages, in these vernaculars, is of no use as compared to the English books that are there. And what I really see at this point is how the government is kind of reverse colonizing the same thing. So like there was a certain period of time when we were taught that English is the only language, and that is the only language that is going to get you towards that other end of success, progress, and development. And now the government says that no, we have to be learning in our own languages and all. But then there again is a debate between the north and the south of India, where the southern part of India does not agree with this idea of considering Hindi as as the national language, or the mother tongue kind of a thing that's there. Plus again, and now like I'm going to get a whole circle of this thing. Like I'm also thinking about this whole idea of, as a child, if you are in a school system, what are you really taught about being an Indian? And how do I, as a Muslim Indian, identify myself as an Indian? I now live in Canada, and then people really ask me a lot of things about the culture of India, and because they are acquainted with predominantly how the Hindus kind of have been portrayed in the entire world about spirituality and religion and everything. And so as a Muslim Indian, where do I see myself as an Indian? Because I really do not have anything to offer from that aspect of spirituality and religion that's there. And are like what kind of like what really are we, like I'm really thinking about the education system, and what are we really doing with our own future generations, where we are kind of instilling this hatred about I see here whites and browns, and then I see back in India as Hindus and Christians and Muslims and everything. And another interesting point that I have been noticing all around is that Muslims are not considered as Indians, or there is a hatred kind of a thing that's going on in India for sure. But then same government and then the same prime minister goes to the Arab countries and shakes hands with the Muslims. So what is the difference between these two Muslims? I do not understand.
Well, that is very, very clearly business and real politics and so on. Wherever Adani has interests, the PM has interests. Wherever Indian beef export, all Hindu exporters, but beef exports of India have been growing. And so all these are business things, business dealings, and they all go, lot of our stuff has to their business dealings with these Arab states. And so when it comes to that, there's no, I mean, all that rhetoric is for back home. And here it's part of a dual project. One is the long-term RSS project of defining the Hindu nation as the nation, Indian nation as the Hindu nation. And the second part, which is the more immediate electoral aspect to it, which is that the more you keep things divided between Hindu and Muslim, as Yogi Adityanath says, oh, 70, हम 80% है, वो 20% है, so you will, I mean, your die is cast. You're already kind of won the election before you anything, because all you have to do is to keep the Hindu-Muslim divide alive. So it is a dual thing here. One is the more immediate thing about fighting elections, and the other one has to do with the more long-term RSS agenda. But frankly speaking, the difficulty here is that as long as we are not, as long as we don't address or we are unable to address the larger question of colonialism and how that knowledge becomes the uh, structuring matrix or foundation for most subsequent politics. So we are all basically living the kind of identities defined by the British. It's not just the fact that Hindu Muslim was once set one way in which James Mill wrote the history of India, but it's also that these were the categories then which became formalized and ingrained in a way through colonial censuses. And then there is this whole business of defining what is Hindu and what is not. In the case of Muslims, that was not a problem because at least there's certain definable things. There may be sects within, but you can say broadly these are different Muslim sects because they owe allegiance to some kind of set of beliefs or a book or whatever. But here there was nothing of that sort. So what they started doing was to initially they started collecting, as Nick Dirks's work shows, so they started collecting through ethnographic material and so on, stories and so on. But you can't make sense of those. Everybody has a different story to tell about what they are and who they are and so on. So finally, what did they do? They basically employed Brahmins to help them figure out what Indian tradition is, and that was Nick Dirks calls the textualization of tradition. So basically, what happens is that with the help of these Brahmins, the British defined Hinduism in a purely textualized Brahminical way, with the basis based on Brahminical texts. And that becomes the basis for the whole 150 years after that, disputes, resolutions within colonial legislatures and in the judiciary. So different communities, different groups, caste groups, jatis are going, their claim to being Hindu is being contested. They are going to the courts, or their case is going to the legislatures, and they are deciding on based on what? They're based on basically deciding based on the already textualized Brahminical interpretation of what is Hindu and what is not. So that in a way has become our problem, that we are now kind of living out or playing the role defined through those 150 years of colonial knowledge and governmentality. To break out of that, one has to go back to it in a certain sense to explore this whole thing. What has now become, it looks like it's so naturalized, Hindus and Muslims. No, it's not. And that's what probably is the big challenge, to actually break it, to actually break that understanding that this is all very recent and how it came about. And there are movements within, for example, within Hinduism, the OBC, the Dalit, the OBCs, and so on. Now, when they make their claims, the authoritarian power of the Brahminical elite comes back with the full force of trying to suppress their voice and saying you're dividing the Hindus, right? Or you're dividing the nation and so on. Now, that has to be challenged. Uh, it cannot be simply challenged in courts of law, because courts of law are gone in any case, but they have to be challenged also in longer term sense, in terms of the very constitution of that knowledge, where these identities were formed and framed and how natural they are. I mean, what feminists did to the binary of the male and the female was probably at one level, it looked even more biological than anything else. I mean, it looked even more natural and biological. But today we do believe that biological, it's not exactly a binary of that sort, and that there are actually a range of sexualities. In a way, the challenge is similar. You have to break the naturalness that has acquired, that has these categories of Hindu and Muslim have acquired, and show that no, this is actually a very different way in which people see themselves, and different uh, configurations of identity happen.
Yeah, thanks, Aditya, for the reflections, and Saba for the question. We have one comment plus a question in the chat box. I'll just read that for you. It's from Asim Siddiqui. It's Asim says that thanks for hosting such interesting conversation on hijacking of decolonial discourse as a strategy for epistemic justice. Should we critically engage and reclaim the IKS discourse in the diverse complexity of plural epistemologies that have historically led to new ideas in sciences, maths, philosophy, or that has the danger of legitimizing the IKS discourse, and the focus needs to be on critiquing its Brahmanical imagination?
No, I think that's also worth doing. I mean, I am that actually generally opposed to any monostrategic, singular strategic kind of position. I think there are many ways in which we need to contest them. One of the ways is to challenge this very idea of their idea of Indian knowledge. So one is the kind of thing you wrote, Sharan, about Indian knowledge system or systems on the multiplicity and the plurality and so on. That's one kind of way in which one can say that you can break it up. But the other thing is to, even without challenging it, just redefine what it means, what Indian knowledge systems would mean, and whether they want to take it all back to the source, right? But Indian can also be defined, redefined in different ways. So that, I mean, see, Indian is an English word, And even if they use Bharatiya Gyan Parampara, it's not like they have actually, and we know what they're thinking. But I always find it interesting that when Gandhi wrote Hind Swaraj, he decided to call it Hind Swaraj and not Bharat Swaraj or something like that, because Hind was what was present. That was India. Indian for Gandhi was not something which resided in some past. That is why the term Hind Swaraj is interesting. And I think when you say Indian knowledge system, we need to bring it out of that cave where they want to take it back. So we have to insist that India is India only, not in that Gangotri, but right in, like, the Ganga is the Ganga only after it has passed through Allahabad and Banaras and Hooghly. Without that, it's not the river. So that semantic tussle is very much part of the struggle. I mean, let's face it, ultimately, this is a war. And that's why I say I don't feel particularly afraid of, or about being hijacking and all that, because I think this is a war where concepts are our weapons. And I cannot simply say that because he's walked away with my concept, I'll let it go. It's not like a thing. I have to reclaim it. I have to, that's mine. It's not yours. It's not, they were not doing this, neither during the, leave alone the decolonial or the postcolonial. They were not even doing this during the time when people like the Rampal or the other Gandhians are trying to dig out Indian indigenous knowledge systems in different ways, or whatever was going on in pre-colonial India. They weren't doing all that. They were just trying to go into some kind of Sanskrit. And again, what is the basis of that? Most of it is again the work done by the Orientalists. So all this great thing about being Vishwaguru, would not have been there without the Europeans. And I'm not talking only of the German romantics. Voltaire, in his writings, talks about the Brahmins as the ultimate religion, Brahminism as the ultimate religion, where even the Chinese and the others went to get their knowledge and so on. But what was he doing? He was actually trying to fight Christianity's battle against Judaism, against the Jews. And so this whole thing about Brahminism, I mean, you read, I can quote right now, I have to fish it out. But you can quote chapter and verse from him where actually he's doing this, and he's an enlightenment. He's like one of the key figures of the Enlightenment. So you start from people like Voltaire, you go through all the Max Mullers and the German romantics and so on and so forth, and you basically come to this idea that the world's great wisdom was all lying with India. Till then, the Hindu intelligentsia of the 19th century was a defeated, morose intelligentsia who had no, I mean, they had no self-confidence. This self-confidence only starts coming once the Europeans and they start kind of celebrating Sanskrit as the great, along with Latin and uh, the whole idea of an Indo-European group of languages and so on and so forth. So all this actually comes from a particular kind of very perverse way in which uh, Brahminism came to be celebrated and instituted as, in Voltaire's case, it was counter to Judaism, and here it was a counter to Islam. That you had to basically, that was the, and I'm being very brutal about it. I am still like that. There entire thrust of the British against Islam had nothing to do with what was going on here. It came from elsewhere.
Great. Thanks, Aditya, and thanks all of you for the conversation. We are almost towards the time, and I wish that we can continue further. But prior to conclusion, as I see there are, no other questions and reflections in the chat box. I just want to take an advantage of this. You write this very, and I feel because all the conversations that we are having has also been so well reflected in your uh, piece on the seventh thesis on decoloniality, and where you write the seventh point as it's how it is essential to broaden the experiential and the intellectual base of the humanities and social sciences, and not to replace one parochialism with another. Whatever we call as, like, the one parochialism is the Western parochialism with whatever we are calling as India or other forms of parochialism, as you highlight in your statement there. I was wondering, at the very basic level for us, whatever we are doing, researchers, activists, independent thinkers, academicians, in these very complex states of surveillances and censorships and the penalizations that everyday individuals are undergoing for speaking out in support of justice and logic and reason, what do you think at the very basic level as individual within these limitations, where do we start with the change? Where it can be started off? How do we start off with to gradually and slowly, drip by drip, as Sarah Ahmed would often use this particular perspective, start resisting in the experiential way, in the practical ways, and not just based on theories and philosophies.
No, that's the very difficult thing, because actually the everydayness of the fight is so overwhelming sometimes. Every day some masjid is being attacked. Every day there's goons are going and dancing before somebody, or lynching some people and so on, or sending bulldozers. That the it's like, Krishna Kumar once used this very evocative phrase about, he used it in the context of education and literacy and illiteracy. And he said, look, all what we are doing is like mopping the floor with the tap running. Right? Now you have to stop the tap running. But our everyday, day-to-day work is always firefighting. They are setting places on fire and we are running around dousing the fire. And really, that doesn't leave much scope or time for anything beyond. So we're continuously forced into this very reactive politics, which is why I think that ultimately the break has to be made by stepping aside from that politics also. But that is also necessary. I mean, I'm not saying that firefighting cannot, you cannot leave that. Some people are doing that and they have to do it. But it's equally necessary to simultaneously slowly build up spaces of critical interrogation and dismantling of this common sense which they have, and what they have made into common sense, but which is actually a pernicious kind of idea. And I think what we do at the level of philosophy or high theory and so on is one thing, but the kind of conversations you're having, for example, these can be had in my drawing room or somebody else's drawing room, 10 people, 15 people, in different levels of society, different places. But these are very important. I mean, these kind of conversations are important precisely because they help us step back from that immediacy of firefighting and take things, take a more realistic view of things at where you can intervene and like where the fault lines are, where you can actually break their discourse.
Thank you so much, Aditya, for these set of
Thanks, Ashwin.
reflections. And absolutely, I mean, we need at the very basic level, if nothing else, we need to bring these conversations to the forefront. At least we need to sit together, brainstorm. We can have our own perspectives of disagreements and different viewpoints, but one
Yeah.
thing we cannot ignore the fact that we are all troubled, deeply disturbed, deeply impacted by this present state of the socio-political chaos
Yeah.
that our country is undergoing.
Right. Yeah.
And we can take this as one final point slash question. It's from Asim again. You raised an important, as Asim says, you raised an important aspect of being defeated and insecurity of Hindu intelligentsia in 19th century. But can you give an analysis of why they are not working with medieval texts like Lilavati or works of Kerala School of Astronomy slash Maths?
Kerala in the south actually would be a very different thing. I don't know how much of the North Indian elite actually had any living connection with the with what was going on in the south, and which is why I think south still remains very different. What I'm talking about is primarily, I think, in the North Indian elite, North Indian Brahminical elite, which is where they're entrenched. I mean, in UP, you have like 13% Brahmins. Nowhere else you'll have them. Like Tamil Nadu, you had 2, 3%. Most places, 3, 4% of the population. So I think here, and especially because this was where quote unquote Islamic rule was most entrenched. And therefore, the whole post-British uh, realization, it's a bit like, I think, suddenly the Hindus today start feeling that they've been oppressed for 1,000 years. These guys have they have no experience of anything of that sort. Where are they getting it from? They're just getting it from a certain kind of discourse which has been pervaded, which has constituted them in a certain way. So that is what happened to these 19th century people. I actually can't say why they would have ignored, apart from the fact that they were perhaps, I mean, those kind of people were perhaps still in a minority who were probably had the cultural confidence uh, in the north. The kind of figure, let us say, you find in Tagore, you won't find very many here uh, because of the same reason, right? But this is just a conjecture. I really won't be able to answer that with any solid information or knowledge about.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Aditya. Thank you so much, all of you, for your great participation, your reflections, your comments, and perceptions. And we hope that we continue this conversation, this reflection um, across various other spaces, because at the very minimum level, within all the sorts of restrictions and the tensions that we are all sort of encountering, this is what is at the very basic level we can do. So thank you so much, Aditya.
Thank you, and thank you everybody actually for the comments and the questions also, and for being here, of course.